Welcome to the All of Christ for All of Life podcast, where we equip men and women to be faithful in every aspect of life. This week, you will hear a discussion on natural law with Jay Budziszewski and Douglas Wilson. I pulled this talk from our YouTube channel. You can find us at youtube.com/canonpress, where we just hit 20,000 subscribers. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much for helping us grow. We see this as a very strategic platform that we want to continue to grow on. We want to continue to bless folks who have never heard us. If you haven't, please go subscribe. It means a lot. It helps more folks see what we're doing here at Canon Press.
Dr. Budziszewski, it's good to have you here with us at Canon Wired. Look forward to our talk, our visit. Welcome to Moscow.
Thank you.
I would like to spend our time talking about natural law, which is a specialty of yours, something you focus on. And I'd like to begin by asking if you make a distinction between natural law and natural revelation. And if you do make a distinction, what would it be? Or do you think that those are synonyms?
Well, they're almost synonyms. I would say that natural law is a part of general revelation.
Okay,
All
a
right.
subset of
A subset of general revelation. General revelation is what God has revealed to the whole human race, rather than just that special revelation which He has given to the community of faith.
Okay.
So, general revelation includes the possibility of knowing that there is a God from the evidence of creation. Now, that's not specifically moral.
Right.
Although it has moral implications, but general revelation also includes the fact that we can know His basic moral requirements, even apart from the Bible, even apart from special revelation, and that's the natural law.
Okay, so natural law is a subset of general revelation, but not the entirety of it.
Right. Right.
Okay, so could an atheist follow natural law while excluding some parts of general revelation?
Well, he could in part. An atheist, as a matter of fact, I get this from my students all the time. I'll talk about natural law, and the mainstream of the natural law tradition has always held that its authority and its nobility is rooted in God. An atheist will say, "Well, I don't believe in God, and I think that I can follow the moral law. I have a conscience." And I say, "Sure, you have a conscience. You can't help but have a conscience. This is built into us. There's a law written on the heart." But the difficulty for you is going to be that since you don't believe in God, you're going to find it hard to explain to yourself what your conscience is.
Okay. So you cannot account for your conscience.
You can't account
from your premises.
From your premises, you can't account for your conscience. You're going to have to turn it into. You're going to have to view it as an instinct that doesn't work, or as just some sort of leftover from how you were socialized. Well, there's much more to it than that. You aren't going to be able to explain how it speaks to you with authority, how it speaks in a voice of law.
Okay.
And it isn't just a bunch of feelings or inhibitions and compulsions or something.
Or instinct, or just raw instinct.
Or just raw instinct. Yeah, and there's also the fact that even if he is responding to deep conscience, he's not responding to all of it.
Okay.
Right? If he's rejecting God, then there's one part of his moral duty that he's certainly going to be neglecting. He's not going to be if justice can be defined as giving what is due to someone, rendering what is due to someone. Well, we adoration and gratitude are due to God.
Okay.
And the atheist, he doesn't believe in God. He can't render that to him.
And he can't account. So he can't account for what he knows.
He can't account for what he knows. How on earth do I know this? How on earth could there even be a right and wrong?
Okay.
And how on earth could I know it?
Now, if you were talking to someone from the Reformed tradition or the Van Tillian tradition, let's say Van Til or Frame or Bonson, someone like that, they would say, well, of course, Romans 1 tells us that the heavens that God's character, His majesty, His attributes are seen in what is made.
Yes.
And in the Psalms, where day unto day the sky, the created order, pours forth speech. So they would say, yes, the Bible says that God reveals Himself in the created order.
Yes.
Right. would you say, yes, that's what I'm talking about? That's the same thing I'm talking about? Or is there something else going on there?
Well, I'm certainly including that.
Okay.
I think that we can, when the Apostle Paul goes into the city of Athens,
Right.
he comments to the men of Athens that he sees that they're very religious. They even not only do they recognize such a thing as deity, but they also know that they're not really fully in touch with it.
Right.
They've got the altar to an unknown God.
Right.
They've got these Godward longings.
Right.
That are directing them to a God whom they also know is unknown, right. and he says, I can tell you who he is.
Right.
Paul, interestingly, in the first chapter of the book of Romans, doesn't criticize the pagans because they don't know about God. He doesn't say, those darn pagans, they ought to know about God and they don't. His criticism is rather they do know about God. It has been known since the beginning from what has been made, but they suppress it, right? They hold the knowledge down. They don't wipe out the knowledge. They can't destroy it, but they're in denial.
Okay.
They pretend to themselves that they don't know what they really do. Now, that's part of it.
Okay.
But moral revelation goes beyond that. I don't just know that there is a God, right? There's for instance, there's one of the witnesses that God has placed within us. There is conscience.
Mm-hmm.
There are the details of our design.
Okay.
These give us clues as to how we need to live. For instance, the complementarity of the sexes, men and women. There's something missing in the makeup of a man. Every wife knows this, all right? There are things that he needs to know. He needs to learn from her. He needs to be balanced by her. And women need to be balanced by men, too. We need each other.
I like to say at weddings, when I'm doing a wedding, that God created this and said it was good, and God created this and it was good, and he created this and it was good, and then he created a solitary male and said, that's not good. It's not good that man should be alone.
Even those who are called to a life of consecrated celibacy do not ignore the existence of the other sex. There's a recognition of the complementarity of the sexes and the proper understanding even of that. Now, I think that and then there's the witness of natural consequences. When we live in a way that is contrary to the natural law, our design, the created order, strikes back at us. Things happen. You abuse heroin and you're going to become enslaved. You betray all of your friends, you're not going to have friends. You desert all your wife and your children, and you're going to have no one giving you care and comfort when you're old and in need of care and comfort. You jump from bed to bed, and you're going to lose the very capacity for romantic trust and intimacy.
Do you,
so these are additional witnesses, moral witnesses that God has placed in our nature.
What you just talked on when speaking of the complementary nature of the sexes, and sort of Paul says in Romans 1, receiving in themselves the due penalty of their error. If you abuse the created aspect of your body, if you abuse it through promiscuity or homosexuality or whatever, you're not following the instructions, and the whole thing's going to fall apart. That's a central part of your argument.
It's a central part of my argument here, although I try to accentuate the positive here.
Right.
I do talk about the natural consequences of defying all of this in the book, but I'm more focused on the possibilities of living in harmony with it.
Okay, and the book for the viewers is on the meaning of sex, and that's in the Intercollegiate Studies Institute?
Intercollegiate Studies Institute, ISI Books. ISI Books.
So, going back to the natural revelation, if we said that we look at the stars, we look at the ocean, we look at the planet, we look at the intricate structure of our own bodies. My brother-in-law is a medical doctor, and he had an atheist, unbelieving professor in medical school who said the liver is so complicated that God couldn't even make one.
That's a very interesting argument against God.
Yeah. This is so complex. The delicacy and complexity of our being, the very nature of our being, all cries out for the existence of a God and His moral law imprinted on us. But how would you respond to the argument? Yes, that's all true, that the created order does this, but because we have fallen into sin, we are blinded to it. So that Paul says, yes, natural revelation leaves them without excuse, but it's not salvific. It's not something that...
Oh, I certainly agree that in the first place that it's not salvific.
Right.
Now, I think, though, that I want to make a distinction, a very strong distinction, between self-deception and ignorance.
Okay.
I think even when we are in denial, deep down we still know more than we admit to ourselves. When I was an atheist and and a nihilist and denied that there was a real difference between good and evil,
Right.
I really think that deep down I did know. And it was only in retrospect that I came to realize this. I was very angry with God, and
For not existing.
For not no, but not exactly. Some people are angry with him perhaps for not existing. But I told myself that he didn't exist partly as a way to get back at him.
Okay.
I had not been living according to his plan. Predictably, all sorts of things went wrong in my life.
Right.
And telling myself that he didn't exist was a sort of a way of getting divine revenge. You know, I think that strange things like this were going on in my life. So when I was saying that there was no God, or there was no God who could make a difference, was it really the case that I was in complete ignorance all the way down?
Right.
No, I don't think that I was. Or when I told myself that there was no good and evil, I couldn't make sense of my love for my wife and my children. But I did love my wife and my children, and cared for them.
You're making a distinction then between pure ignorance or simple ignorance and culpable ignorance.
Yes, I think that when you're lying to yourself and telling yourself that you don't know what you really do, that is culpable. I wouldn't call it ignorance. I'd call it pretended ignorance, and I think it's culpable.
Okay.
If it was real ignorance, I don't think that we could be blamed. If it was true ignorance and we didn't have a clue, we didn't know, right, I don't think even God could blame us. But it isn't ignorance. It is self-deception.
So Paul in Romans says it's through the law that we have knowledge of sin. So it's in order to have sin, in order to have that culpability, there's got to be some awareness.
There's got to be some awareness. Yes, I think that's right. And you might kick against the goad. You know, you might be infuriated by that, by your awareness of the law, instead of responding to it. But you really know deep down that's wrong too.
Okay, well let's talk for a moment about how we can cash this out. If there is a natural law, just as if there's such a thing as canon law, you have canon lawyers. If there's Idaho law, you have Idaho, lawyers
Sure.
admitted to the Idaho bar. Are there natural lawyers?
Yeah, I use the expression natural lawyers all the time. As a matter of fact, it's just as a sort of a punning way of speaking of natural law thinkers, natural law philosophers.
How do you get admitted to the bar?
How do you get admitted to the bar? Well, all of us have a sort of a natural qualification, because we've all. An expression that I like to use is the four witnesses.
Okay.
We all have the four witnesses. St. Paul speaks to the pagans in a certain city. The incident is recorded in the book of Acts. He says, no, these guys are pagans. They're not Jews. They didn't know about Torah. They didn't know about the revelation through Moses. They didn't know about any of this stuff. But he says, God did not leave the nations without witness.
Right.
All those Gentile nations, he didn't leave them without witness. Now, some people have taken that to mean personal witness, and he could have meant that in part. There were Jewish missionaries, a lot of people don't realize this, who went out to the pagan lands and sought converts. There are allusions to this in the gospel. But I think that this, if you look at the context, he says witnesses like God sent you rain in fruitful seasons. He means witnesses that are built into the structure of creation itself, and built into the plan, you might say, of God's providence, of how he governs the universe. So what would those witnesses be? Well, there's deep conscience, the law written on the heart. There is, and that isn't just a residue of what's pumped in by socialization.
Right.
There is the recognition of the designedness of things, which does a lot for us. For one thing, it fortifies that first witness, conscience.
Okay.
Because if you didn't know that conscience was designed, you'd have no reason to take it seriously. You would just say, man is the result of a meaningless and purposeless process that did not have us in mind, and conscience is one of those meaningless parts. There's the recognition of the details of the design. I mentioned one we were talking about, is sexual complementarity. And then there's the witness of natural consequences. Those four clues we all have. The classical natural law theories weave together all of those four witnesses. There are some getting off the track natural law theories that try to pay attention to just one or two of those witnesses at the expense of the others.
Let's talk for a minute about the consequences. You mentioned heroin addiction. You wreck your body, and promiscuity. You wreck your body. You do a lot of damage.
Yeah, we do damage also to ourselves, not just physically but socially. Kids growing up without dads.
Okay.
We do damage to ourselves noetically. One of the consequences, if deep down you know that something is wrong and you tell yourself it isn't, and you do it,
okay,
and you're trying to pretend to yourself that you didn't know that you did wrong, you will suffer consequences, certain pathologies as a result of your guilty knowledge. I'd count that too.
Okay. Now, suppose you're talking to an unbeliever who comes to the exchange prepared to swallow the reductio. Let's say David Hume. And he says, yes, but how do you know damage is bad? How do you, the famous problem, how do you get from the is, I admit, he'll say, I admit that this junkie has wrecked his body.
Yeah.
I admit that these consequences, but we're just describing consequences in the world. How do we know?
Yeah.
How do we get from is to ought?
Yeah, I think that the so-called naturalist fallacy is not a fallacy. There are a couple of natural law thinkers who think it is a fallacy and who try to develop versions of natural law theory that get around that. I don't think they really work. Interestingly, philosophers have been recognizing more and more, since at least the 1950s, the work of a Christian philosopher named Peter Geach, that there are certain legitimate ways of getting from is to ought. One of his examples is, this isn't moral law, but the question is whether you can get from descriptive premises to evaluative conclusions.
Okay.
I may make the descriptive observation that the purpose of a soccer ball is to play soccer with.
Okay.
Well, if that's true, then if a soccer ball is unsuitable for the game, it's leaky, let's say,
right,
it can't hold air,
yeah,
then it's a bad soccer ball.
Okay.
All right. Now bad. That's an evaluative conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
When you know the function of something, which is evaluative, which is descriptive data, you can reach an evaluative conclusion. Now we can do things like that. We can say, well, the function of the eye is to see.
So a bad eye is a blind one.
If the eye can't see well, it's a bad eye, and since good is to be done and brought about, the right thing to do with a bad eye is try to help it to be a better one. Okay. Then you can, and a lot can be learned this way. What is the purpose of the heart? Well, it's to pump blood. What is the purpose of the lungs? To oxygenate the blood. I shouldn't be sniffing glue.
Right.
All right. What are the purposes of the sexual powers? Well, they have to do with making families, with procreation, and with the unity of the spouses, the two procreative partners.
Right.
What is the purpose of anger? It's to arouse us to the defense of endangered goods. And when it's used in a way that's detrimental to that, that's a bad use of anger.
Okay.
These are all ways of getting from is to ought that are legitimate.
What do you don't want to ask you cold because you may not have done much with him, but what do you think of Thomas Reid's contemporary answer to David Hume? Where he Scottish common sense philosophy.
Well, I think Scottish common sense philosophy and a lot of other Enlightenment philosophies, as a matter of fact, had retained some pieces of the classical natural law tradition, but not all of the pieces.
Okay.
And there's a lot of problems there because the classical natural law wants to say, no, this isn't just a moral sense. Analogous to the sense of touch or the sense of smell or the sense of hearing, which some of the common sense philosophers said. This is actually moral knowledge. What we're talking about is the mind. We're using the faculties of knowledge. The expression that I've used, deep conscience, is a sort of a paraphrase of a term that was used, synderesis, which means the natural habit of the mind, so that the tendency of the mind to be aware of the foundational principles of moral reasoning.
So, natural law. Let's say someone in the grip of natural law, he does something contrary to it. You're saying more than that this results in vague, guilty feelings. You're saying this results in a knowledge of guilt.
Oh, yes, as a matter of fact, it may not result in guilty feelings.
Right.
I think probably every one of us has had the experience at some time in his life of doing something you knew was wrong, but you didn't feel bad.
Right.
So that right there tells us that there's a difference between guilty knowledge
Right.
and guilty feelings.
Right.
If we use the word remorse for guilty feelings, you can have guilt, you can have the knowledge of your guilt and not have remorse.
Right.
There are in fact some people who never experience remorse, but that's different than saying that they don't have guilty knowledge.
Right.
People who study so-called sociopaths
Right.
are often puzzled because many of the psychologists are confused. They think that since these guys never experience remorse, they think they don't have a conscience. But that can't explain the fact that, curiously, sociopaths make excuses for their wrongdoing. And they make use of moral principles in order to try to make excuses for themselves. Why is that going on? There was a fellow in Austin who he was interviewed by a reporter. This was in the newspaper years and years ago. He had shot and killed a video store rental clerk. But he told the police, he told the first reporter who spoke to him that he didn't feel any remorse for this. He didn't feel bad. A second reporter went out and talked to him, I don't know why, and said, "You really don't feel bad for what you did?" The police were saying he has no conscience. The first reporter said he has no conscience. And the fellow said, "You really don't feel bad for what you did?" He said, "No." Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that the reporter just was dumbfounded and didn't know what to say next, and that perhaps what the prisoner said next was speaking into that silence. Right. Silence is helpful sometimes. The guy said, "Yeah, I don't feel bad for what I did." Pause. There must be something wrong with me, don't you think? Because I should feel bad for what I did.
Right.
Now, if you feel bad for not feeling bad,
do you feel bad? Then
you've got guilty knowledge.
Right.
You may not have normal guilty feelings, but yes, you've got guilty knowledge. This man had a conscience.
Okay. One of the as we're playing sort of philosophical, theological bumper cars in the natural revelation. Let's return to the Van Tillian. We need special revelation because natural revelation, however true it is, we're blinded by sin. We resist it. We fight it off as you described earlier, but not successfully. In other words, we have enough revelation from God or revealed to us from God to know that we're guilty, to have this guilty knowledge, but it's not salvific.
Yes.
Now, so then someone comes and preaches the gospel. We have special revelation. And of course, the same thing is true of special revelation. People can be as blind to the Bible as
sure they can.
as they are to the created order, and you can't see what God's saying in the Bible any more than you can see what He says in the stars without grace, without God giving you that gift.
Yeah, full disclosure here, I'm not a Van Tillian, but those things that Van Til is saying, there are things that every Christian would say. I think
you agree with that?
I think I agree with that. Sure.
Okay, so I'm trying to get to a place where
natural law, the knowledge of natural law alone is not salvific. You can try and do the right thing.
Okay.
But let's face it, as C.S. Lewis said, there are two clues to the meaning of the universe.
Right.
There's the one that there really is a law that we didn't make.
Right.
But the other big clue to the meaning of the universe is we don't live up to it.
Right.
There's something wrong with us.
Okay.
And we can't fix it.
Right.
Somebody is going to have to help us. Paul speaks to the Athenians about the unknown God. I think much of the human race is longing for the unknown Savior.
Right.
And so that's why the gospel can come as good news, that just as the unknown God really exists, Paul can say, I can tell you who He is. The unknown Savior does.
It's also interesting, in Athens, that altar to an unknown God was a monument to the plague that Athens had had centuries before. And they called for Epimenides, the Cretan, that Paul in Titus calls a prophet, one of their own. And he came to Athens, and he's the one who told them to sacrifice to the unknown God.
Yeah. I think that one of the reasons why people can respond who have not whole cultures sometimes who have not heard the gospel can respond to the gospel is that this longing for the unknown Savior has been planted in them by God.
All right. Now, it seems to me that if we went to an island, some island somewhere where you had where missionaries had not gone, and people had an awareness of the Most High God, but they didn't live up to it. They were sinful. The whole thing. We could have an interesting philosophical, debate, discussion, panel discussion between presuppositionalists and evidentialists and Van Tillians and non-Van-Tillians and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But the real sticking point, it seems to me, comes when you're dealing with natural law in sort of nations that used to be part of Christendom. So you have or nations like ours where there's a prevalence, a widespread knowledge of the faith from special revelation, the knowledge of the
post-Christians.
Post-Christians, or you've got a lot of people who've read the Bible and a lot of churches, and so you've got, and a public policy issue comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question that I have here is, and I'm not sure how this can be navigated quite, but I'd harken back to a couple of essays you wrote a number of years ago. I thought they were magnificent essays. The problem with liberalism and the problem with
I know the ones.
Conservatism, for First Things, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the charges that you lay, and you're talking about secular liberalism and secularized conservatism, sort of right-wing, left-wing,
right,
sort of things, but all part of the secular liberal establishment.
Right.
Okay. So one of the, and I thought both essays were fantastic and great. Well, the first charge you lay at the feet of secular conservatism is the charge of civil religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sort of a generic deity.
And religion for the sake of usefulness, for the sake of making people good citizens, for the sake of the state,
right?
Rather than for the sake of God, because it's true.
Right. So you were that was a later, I think you called it instrumentalism,
yes,
where you're trying to get
right. I did distinguish.
Okay.
You remember my article better than I do.
Well, I read it back then and just recently refreshed. So, but with this, so my question is, this natural law, this civil religion, a generic deity, isn't that what natural law gets us?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, could you tease that out, please?
When I know what you mean by a generic deity. Sometimes people say we ought to be for religion in general. The people will say, religion is a good thing, and I always want to say, well, what religion are you talking about? Do you mean Shinto?
Yeah.
Do you mean Christianity? Do you mean those things that, let's say, Christians and Jews and deists agree about? Do you mean voodoo? do you mean Thuggee, the assassin cult of worship of the goddess Kali? Religion in general is not a good thing.
Right.
In fact, even secularism, insofar as all secular creeds posit some object of ultimate loyalty, they've all got some god with a little g. That's religion too, but it's not necessarily good. Now, the God that natural law is talking about, what we say that you can know about God from general revelation is not a general God. He could be any of those things, right? It's possible from the evidence of creation to know that there is a God, that He is the Creator, that there's only one of Him.
That He's bigger than the United States.
That He's way bigger than the United States. That the United States better not think that it can take Him under its wing. That He is good. Okay. That He is that He is the origin. That He is the Creator and the uncreated origin of all our conceptions of goodness. Now that right there, it isn't generalized God anymore, because it rules out a whole lot of conceptions of God. It rules out Kali, the goddess of death. It rules out voodoo deities where it's all about the accumulation of power.
Right.
It rules out many things. It's just that there are some pieces missing. Reason, through the evidence of how we are made and how the cosmos is made, can take us up to a certain point. but it can't take us the rest of the way. And Revelation takes us the rest of the way. And now what we've got now is not only the evidence of nature, of creation, but the evidence of history, of what this God who created the universe, this God who is the author of the moral law, is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Moses, and who came among us as Jesus Christ, and who died for our sins.
Okay, so would you say that natural law gets us to the Christian God?
It gets us to the Christian God, but without knowing, but by itself, it can't tell you. I mean, I could take that in a certain sense as yes, it gets you to identifying some things about the Christian God, but you don't have all the details filled in.
All right, so you exclude by a correct application of what you're describing as being a natural lawyer. You work through this and you exclude Melanesian frog worship, and you exclude.
Yes, sure.
You exclude.
Yeah, you can. You say it isn't that. It isn't that. It isn't that. It's a creator. He's good. He's the author of the moral law. He's the source of our being. He's the source of all possibilities of joy and goodness. But I don't know who he is. Now Revelation comes along and says, this is who he is.
Okay, now when I get to Revelation, is it sort of like the Final Four? Where I've got...
I don't have a sports gene. You're going to have to explain.
Okay.
That's either that or it's Marvel Comics. But no, that's the Fantastic Four.
Right. So you've got... Do I now need special revelation to decide between Islam and Judaism and Christianity and, let's say, Jeffersonian deism? Or do I need special revelation to decide between the Baptists, the Presbyterians, and the Catholics? How do I get to a triune God by me?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't think by reason alone you can get to the triune God. Okay. I think you need revelation for that.
Okay.
Now, on the other hand, revelation is not. We don't have to be fideists here. We don't have to say I believe because I believe because I believe because I believe. I don't think that's how the Holy Spirit.
Turtles all the way down.
Yeah, it turtles all the way down. I don't think that's how the Holy Spirit works. And even under the influence of grace, we aren't shutting off our minds. It's that our minds are being assisted here.
All right. So
and one can give, for example, classically Christians would say, well, why do you believe this? Why do you believe that Jesus was? Well, we've got some arguments here. We have some evidence. He performed these miracles. There was the empty tomb. There is the continuing work of the Holy Spirit among us. There's the astonishing fact of the survival of the church in all these centuries. There's the work of the apostles. There's the chain of witnesses. Now you can say, well, those are arguments from authority. Those don't mean anything. Arguments from authority are very reasonable. I only know that there's a country called China because of authority. I've never been there, right? There are many things I only know because trustworthy witnesses have told me.
So if you have, let's say you took out a dollar bill and it says on there, "In God We Trust."
Yeah.
Is that the God of natural law, or is that?
There's no telling what Congress meant. Probably when Congress enacted this as a motto for the United States, right. In God We Trust. I'm sure that some of the members of Congress had in mind the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Moses,
right.
who came among us as Jesus Christ, and others. Who knows? They might have meant some God of civil religion. Who knows what God they all had in mind?
Okay.
And it's very odd when you read what the Supreme Court has said about these things.
Yeah.
In one famous case, both the right wing of the court and the left wing of the court, Justice O'Connor was at that time considered in the right wing,
mm-hmm.
and Justice Brennan, who was on the left wing, both said the reason that you can say things like "In God We Trust" is because because you're not actually endorsing belief in God.
Yeah.
They said it's just
because we're hypocrites.
Yes, because we're hypocrites, right? It's just pious stuff that motivates people to sacrifices that they wouldn't otherwise undertake. Now that's very funny too, because why would it motivate them if they didn't believe it?
Yeah.
So basically, what you're saying is, we, the godless elite, who enact this, we don't believe it.
Right.
but we're pulling the religious strings of all those suckers down there who do believe it. It's like what the sociologist Peter Berger once famously said when he said it's sometimes said that the Indians are the most religious people in the world, and that the Swedes are the least religious. He says America is a country of Indians ruled by Swedes.
Yes. Now, if that's the case, if you've got this goes back actually to Cicero's instrumentalism. Cicero.
I'm not so sure. I used to think Cicero was an instrumentalist, and I'm not nearly as sure of that now as I'm coming to think now that in the last 5 years or so, I've been coming around to the view that he really did believe it.
Okay.
I think he thought it was also instrumentally helpful, but I think he really did believe that this God that he was talking about was the real thing.
Okay. So you would say he was a natural. He came to a
I
God.
I think he was a natural lawyer. I think he did believe on grounds of natural revelation that there was deity.
Okay. Now, in the late 40s, back in the era of inserting under God in the Pledge of Allegiance and the Eisenhower era, in the late 40s and early 50s, when a lot of this was going on, the National Association of Evangelicals at that time were pressing a main part of their agenda. They were pressing for a constitutional amendment confessing the lordship of Jesus Christ. Right. So when the evangelical, sort of the anti-communist conservative bloc that was driven by, there were many evangelicals involved in that sort of crusade, and Billy Graham among them. They were thinking in explicit Trinitarian terms when they supported "In God We Trust." All right, so they're confessing the God of revealed religion.
Yes, they are.
Okay, now someone else. I guess my question would be, what should we do if I'm surfing the web and I come across your problem with liberalism and problem with conservatism? It seems to me that your rejection of both those secular ideologies is explicitly Christian.
Yes.
Okay. Now, that means that if we're going to do something that isn't falling into the binary, the dichotomy of liberalism or conservatism, that requires us to not agitate for, but work for, pray for, labor toward a polity or a commonwealth based on revealed religion? Or should we strive for polity based on natural law, or should we be allowed to know more because God has told us more?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think we need to strive for a polity that is, in the first place, founded on natural law.
First place.
Yes. Paul, in a famous passage, remarks about, he's not talking about natural law, he's talking about the law of Moses.
Right.
He says that it was a pedagogos. That was a Greek word. It meant there was a certain servant who would escort the children to school and make them mind their manners and teach them some elementary things, but he wasn't really their teacher. He would get them to school, and then the real teachers would take over. And he said that the Torah, the law of Moses, had been like that servant. It had been a pedagogos, a boy leader,
right,
to the Hebrew people, so that they could come to the school of Christ.
Okay.
Now, I think that the way that Torah functioned then for the Hebrews who were thereby led to Christ, I think that the natural law can work that way.
Okay.
It heightens your awareness of the natural law. It may help to foment in you a sense of holiness, a longing for it that you don't have, so that you are ready for the gospel. You can be led. You can be led to the school of Christ. Now, can a nation, can a polity go further than that? Can there be such a thing as a Christian polity? That's pretty tough. I think that I don't have any problem. Suppose that you had a population of people and they were all Christians,
right,
and they wanted to acknowledge this publicly, and they establish a day of Thanksgiving.
Right.
The president says, "Let's set aside a day of Thanksgiving and fasting." Our American presidents used to do that, and they meant it in an entirely Christian sense. Let's give thanks. We have a legislative chaplain and so forth. I don't have any problem with that. On the other hand, if you're pressing for things like that, gosh, we've got to get prayer back into the schools.
Right.
And what you have is a religiously divided country. Is this really promoting
Right.
promoting faith in God? it's more likely that it's promoting hypocrisy, I think.
Okay, so what you're hesitant about there is a top-down imposition of revealed religion.
I don't think that the state is the custodian of special revelation.
Okay.
I don't think that the state can do much in the way of explicit encouragement of faith in Jesus Christ. What the state can do is take care of its own work, which just the promotion of the common good, of those things that even we and the non-believers can recognize belong to the common good because of the natural law.
So, but if I'm understanding you rightly, if it bubbled up from the grassroots, if it came up organically and naturally, and you had,
sure, yeah, that can happen. The Constitution of Ireland used to include an explicit acknowledgement of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any. If a people, it's grassroots, it bubbles up from the top. It's not an attempt by the state to club people into belief or put them in jail for not believing or something. Then well, why not? Why would we not all express publicly what we all believe?
Right. Got it. So basically, what you're saying, there have been periods in Christian history where the Lord's words compel them to come in have been taken in
the wrong way.
The wrong way.
Yes.
And so what you're saying is that religious liberty is a Christian doctrine.
It is a Christian doctrine. As a matter of fact, we often misunderstand this. There's a sort of a mythology that says that Christianity has always been against religious liberty and religious toleration. That's false. And that religious toleration was never invented until the Enlightenment. And that's false. In fact, there are new forms of religious oppression that began with the Enlightenment. What you do see, though, is that there is a difference between two conceptions of religious toleration and religious liberty. The patristic writers, for instance, a number of them, St. Hilary of Poitiers, for instance, says God does not desire an unwilling worship or a coerced obedience. Because true faith in God has to come from the heart. It's only willing. It's just like you can't compel somebody to love a woman. This is a free act of the will. You can't. This is why marriages without the consent of both parties are not valid. Faith is like that too. It by its own nature it cannot be coerced. The fathers of the church, the patristic writers, were very, very explicit about this. They were explicit about this back in the days when they were still under persecution from the pagans, and they said this is why you shouldn't be. You imagine that you're promoting religion according to your ideas of religion, but true religion cannot be promoted by faith. That which is, by coercion. Whatever it is that can be promoted by coercion isn't faith. And after the Christianity rose to predominance culturally in the empire, they actually continued to say this. Right. Now, contrast that with what we understand religious toleration to be today. You see, there they said, because we know the truth about God, and because we know the truth about faith, that there is a God, but that He does not desire unwilling worship, and faith is by its nature a thing that can't be coerced. We know these things to be true, therefore we must tolerate unbelief.
Right.
Now, today, though, liberal toleration says we must suspend judgment. We don't know what's true, and that's why we must tolerate any other sort of belief. Now, if you really didn't know, then how would you know that you should tolerate?
Right.
And even if you did believe that you should tolerate, how would you know what to tolerate? Because nobody imagines that everything should be tolerated. Let us tolerate rape. Let us tolerate.
Sure.
Let us tolerate theft. Let us tolerate murder. Let us tolerate chewing gum in the movie theater. Right? Everybody makes distinctions. You have to know something. I think the liberal fear is if we believe that we have the answer to what's good and evil, then we'll suppress everything that we think isn't good. Okay. But that's not true. The knowledge of the good can give you some of the reasons why there are even some evils that up to a point have to be tolerated.
Okay. So if you have so the current mission of zealous tolerance, what I call the tolerance buzzsaw.
Yeah. Neutral is tolerance, suspension of judgment, which is really a form of intolerance.
Right, because you're simply it's not honest.
It is. That's absolutely right. The philosopher John Rawls is a good example of that. What he means by public reason is essentially limits on the kind of reasoning that's allowed in public.
Yes. Right. So that was my line of questioning earlier, is that if we believe as Christians who believe in general revelation or natural revelation and special revelation, it's like reading an author who's written 2 books. And if we confess it's the same author of both books.
It's the same author of both books, but one of the books is the elementary book and the other one goes further.
Right. And so you're not objecting to those who have the primer and they go as far as the primer goes.
Right.
Right. That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
But you're not setting the primer and the advanced textbooks at odds with each other.
Yes, that's correct. There are some who think that it was a sort of a pagan thing. For example, when the Declaration of Independence said it appealed to the laws of nature and to nature's God in order to justify the cause of independence from England. No, I don't think that was in itself a pagan thing. Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration, was a pagan, but the statement itself is not in itself pagan. And most of the American founders took it in a perfectly faithful way.
Right, and the Constitution was some years ago. There was a dust up here, and I wrote to the paper and said. Someone claimed there was no reference to God in the Constitution. I said, well, yes, there was, and offered $10 to the first kid at Moscow High School who could find it. And there was a commotion. Well, it turned out the whole thing was ratified in the year of our Lord. Big signature. Yes. They were operating in a different context than the modern secularist context.
Yeah, they were. They had some difficulties. One of the reasons, you think, well, these guys believed in natural law. These guys believed in general revelation. What happened? One of the difficulties is that the theories of natural law that they believed in had already been thinned and flattened by the influences of the Enlightenment.
Okay.
They were inferior theories of natural law. And they'd already thrown a lot of the classical equipment of the natural law tradition out the window. And that was, I think, one of the reasons why it couldn't keep flying. This bird fell to earth, so that in subsequent generations, people even forgot the very name natural law. What does that mean? What is that?
Okay, so to sum up, are you comfortable with? So you're comfortable with saying that God reveals Himself, His ways, and His character, His attributes, in a primer that all human beings have access to.
Yes.
And that's what you're calling natural law, all reflective.
Sure, natural theology and natural law, right.
Okay. And as a confessing Christian, you believe that nothing that we learn here by means of reflection and reason will be overturned later by faith.
That's right.
Okay, it's going to be consistent. It will be
harmonious. It'll be in fact helped by faith. There are so many things, and it's a funny thing. There are a lot of things that in principle you can know by natural reason alone.
Okay.
And yet which most natural law philosophers didn't quite figure out until they also had the help of revelation. Now that's curious. Mm-hmm. If you should have been able to figure out things about the one God without revelation, why didn't you? I think of it this way. I sometimes wander around the house, maybe with my glasses up here, and I say, "Honey, have you seen my glasses?" Mm-hmm. Now, in principle, I could discover where they are,
right.
But I may need it brought to my attention.
Right.
Now, one of the many things that revelation does, it tells us some things that go beyond what we could have known from the natural law, but it also calls our attention to some things that we should have known from the natural law but weren't paying attention to.
One last question that I probably should have inserted earlier. When I say I am much more comfortable with the term natural revelation as opposed to natural law,
mm-hmm.
But as we're discussing this, I think that these things can be harmonized. But one difference is that in natural revelation, God is the one doing the revealing.
Yes.
Okay. In natural law, is God just putting stuff out there that we figure out, or is it? Would you say in natural law, a natural law approach done right, God is doing the revealing?
I would still say God is doing the revealing, but God works through secondary causes, right? I don't think. You know, there are some, I'm told that there are now some, for instance, chemistry textbooks in some of the Islamic republics that where it says God so makes it happen that when this molecule is is with this, but God works through He's created a real universe. It isn't just a figment in His own. It isn't just a virtual reality playing in His mind. Okay, this is a real universe independent from Him that He called out of nothing, and that works according to His laws. Now, among these amazing things that He's done, He's created us. He has made us different than the other creatures. We have rational minds that are able to participate to some small finite degree in His wisdom. But it's His wisdom that they're participating in. It is by His illumination of the mind that these minds are able to function at all. So that if we are able to make an inference and grasp something, I say, thanks be to the grace of God for that. I don't say, oh, I did this without God. So in other words, when people say sometimes that natural revelation or natural law is what you can know without revelation, I would want to qualify that.
Okay.
I would say it's without certain modes of grace, but it's not without grace.
Okay, so you're one of the. As speaking as a Vantillian, I'm I want to be jealous of to guard against human autonomy and pride.
Yes. Oh, I agree.
Right.
I agree. Pride, human autonomy, an arrogant belief in what I could figure out for myself, made me for a dozen years of my life absolutely stupid. I lost the very belief in God, in the reality of good and evil, in the possibility of knowing anything. I ended up where I didn't even believe in my own reality or in my own responsibility for my actions. I don't want to vaunt human pride. Human beings have a certain. I do believe that God made us responsible beings. Our choices are real choices. Mm-hmm. We do have, in that sense, freedom. The word autonomy is not a word that I'm comfortable with because, it says autonomy, autonomous, giving the law to yourself. We're not giving the law to ourselves. Right. No, this is in an expression which is used in Catholic natural law theory, but which is a sort of a friendly nod at Protestant thought about natural revelation. There was a word that Pope Paul II used, participated theonomy.
Okay.
Theonomy meaning the law comes from God.
Right.
Participated meaning God doesn't just jerk us around with strings.
Right.
Okay, He doesn't push us around with instincts. He gave us minds. He actually invites us to enter into His wisdom, to order our own families, for instance, but according to the wisdom that He provides to us. Right? God didn't say, now you all must drive on the left. You must drive on the right. Right? He leaves that to human lawmakers to figure out. But they're working it out from what they can know because of the natural law that we ought to have regard for the safety of our neighbors.
Although Ecclesiastes does say the wise man's heart inclines to the right. But
yeah, sure.
So, just a dumb joke. All right.
yes, and that's why of course it's ungodly to drive on the
wrong side. Well, thank you so much for visiting with us. We're very grateful. Good to have you here.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Small introduction would be great.
Okay. And I'm assuming that everywhere I've looked, it's J, like P. Diddy.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
Like,
that's right. I wish I could come up with something clever like what that's supposed to stand for, but I can't.
Okay, ready? Very good. Well, Dr. Budiszewski, we'd like to welcome you here to Canon Wired. Good to have you with us.
Back up.
Yes.
Since we're being taped, we better pronounce it right.
Okay. All right. I was going to ask that.
It's Budiszewski.
Buj.
Right.
Budiszewski.
Yeah. It's hard. You look at the D and you want to say Budiszewski, but it's Budiszewski.
Budiszewski. Budiszewski.
That's right.
Budiszewski. I'll slur over that.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry to make you start over.
No. All right. Well, Dr. Budiszewski. Dr. B.
You can say that. That's fine.
We last spring, Nancy and I went to Poland, and we were doing some stuff over there, and there were just certain things I couldn't make my mouth.
I know they just lost. Apparently, they used to have vowels.
Yes,
But they lost them over time.
In some sort of cataclysm with the Hawaiian Islands.
Here, this may make it easier because you're logical. All right.
Yeah, all right.
It wasn't until adulthood that I realized that that's why it's pronounced that way.
Okay, now you need a little D at the end of this, right? Bud.
No, you don't.
Bougie.
See, the D for the DZ sound makes a J sound.
Ah,
So DZI is G.
Okay, bougie.
There is no
Bougie.
D. There's no D at all. D's. It's like SH in English. SH doesn't make a SH, right? The S sound and the H sound are just gone. It's a different sound. It's a sh sound.
Okay.
Same thing here. The DZ is really J.
Okay.
Yeah.
Budziszewski.
Perfect.
Budziszewski.
Perfect.
All right. Still rolling, are you?
That could be your most popular hit right there.
Well, Dr. Budziszewski, welcome to Canon Wired. Good to have you here with us. I'd like to try that again. Budziszewski. All right, Budziszewski. I've never had this much trouble with the name. Dr. Budziszewski.
It's because you're thinking about it now. You're going to have me mispronouncing it.
Budziszewski.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the All of Christ for All of Life podcast. That was a discussion on natural law. For more videos and topics like this one, please go subscribe to Canon Press on YouTube.